Well, welcome everyone to our presentation on recommendations for emerald ash borer response in Washington communities. This is a document that we created in our Urban and Community Forestry program at the Washington Department of Natural Resources. And presenting to you today are myself and Daria Gosztyla. My name is M. Roberts, and I have an eclectic background in my 15 years in the tree industry, from hazard tree faller to consulting utility forester to climbing arborist to consultant and trainer. I now serve in my current role of urban forestry technician for Western Washington in the Urban and Community Forestry program at Washington DNR. And I will be joined today by my co-presenter, Daria Gosztyla, who serves in her current role of urban forest inventory and assessment specialist for the Department of Natural Resources.
Yeah.
She brings sorry, would you say something, Joey?
No, sorry,
okay. That's okay. We'll have some chatter in the background, I imagine. Daria brings valuable insight to this presentation and to our industry from her vast experience working with many forest pests over the years, including extensive municipal work managing emerald ash borer in Grand Rapids, Michigan. All right, this is the document we'll be presenting on today, Recommendations for Emerald Ash Borer Response in Washington Communities. Don't worry, you don't have to read all the information on here really fast before we change slides. I just wanted you to become familiar with the layout, so you'll recognize it when you see it, when you find it on our website later. We will go over each component of these recommendations shortly and take a deeper dive into some of them. Because as you can see, this is a short 2-page piece that we put together. So why is it so short? There is so much information on this topic, as maybe some of you know. This is months of digesting emerald ash borer information and compressing it into just the highlight of response recommendations, and spun with a focus geared toward municipalities. We wanted this to be an accessible to everyone with a wide range of understanding about forest pests and be easily consumable. We know that a lot of you have really busy jobs and you don't have time to digest the endless hours of information out there about emerald ash borer, so we made a bite-sized version for you. The intended audience for these recommendations is our urban forestry partners and stakeholders, which consist of local governments such as cities, counties, and towns, tribal governments, 501c3 nonprofit organizations, and educational institutions. If you're watching this webinar and you don't fit into any of those categories, you'll still probably find lots of bits of information that will help you navigate this threatening infestation, so do stick around. So where do I find this document, you ask? The recommendations for emerald ash borer response in Washington communities is easily accessed by scanning this QR code, which is also found on the document itself in case you want to print and distribute this document as a hard copy. That way everyone gets access to the embedded links that provide additional information, since it is such a short document. Or you can go to DNR's Urban and Community Forestry website, which you see here, scroll down to the menu and find the last tab of that menu entitled Urban Tree Learning Center. That has many excellent resources there, one of which is this recommendations document we're discussing today. So what and where is emerald ash borer? Emerald ash borer, which is also commonly referred to as EAB, and the Latin name is Agrillus planipennis, is an exotic invasive forest pest that has decimated ash tree populations across North America, and whose presence is now confirmed in the Pacific Northwest, specifically in Forest Grove, Oregon, which is in Washington County. It is estimated that EAB populations are often present in forests for 3 to 5 years before detection. This pest has not yet been detected in Washington, but it will cause significant impacts on Washington's urban forests when it arrives. For some context of the current distribution of emerald ash borer, here's an up-to-date map from APHIS, the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service from USDA. This pest was first detected in the United States in 2002 in Michigan and spread outward throughout the eastern states from there. It then jumped over from the eastern states to Colorado in 2013, I believe. And then in July of 2022, just last year, it was discovered in Forest Grove, Oregon. Emerald ash borer attacks trees in the Oleaceae family, with the most susceptible hosts being ash, the Fraxinus species, or genus, sorry, and also including olive trees and white fringe trees, with mortality rates of 99% in most ash populations. Oregon ash, or Fraxinus latifolia, is Washington's only native ash tree species. Oregon ash is a critical species to wetland and riparian areas, serving integral roles in these sensitive and valuable ecosystems by cooling water temperatures through shade and providing native fish habitat. This species is important to many indigenous communities. Oregon ash is predominantly found in Southwest Washington, as you can see this map in the range here. Parks and natural areas are the highest priority with this species. So Kevin Zobrist from WSU recently conducted an excellent webinar on April 26th that provides more information on the background of emerald ash borer, host trees, and did a much deeper dive into the management and implications for natural areas and our native Fraxinus latifolia. This recommendations document that we're reviewing today is primarily focusing on urban forests and recommendations for municipalities. There are many other non-native ash or Fraxinus species planted as ornamental shade trees in parks, yards, and along streets. Commonly planted non-ash include, but are not limited to, green ash, Fraxinus pennsylvanica, white ash, Fraxinus americana, narrowleaf ash, Fraxinus angustifolia, European ash, Fraxinus excelsior. And then fifth on the list of our top 5 species in our inventory data is Oregon ash, which is Fraxinus latifolia. Probably not as commonly planted as the other 4 I just mentioned, but it is high on the list. While the populations of ash trees do not make up a large percentage of most street tree inventories for which we have data, the cultural, societal, aesthetic, and financial impacts will be large. The Pest Readiness Playbook is a tool that was designed to prepare communities for outbreaks of invasive species just like emerald ash borer through self-assessments and follow-up actions to improve readiness in each municipality's unique scenario. Washington's goal is to slow the spread of emerald ash borer by taking proactive steps and being prepared by utilizing the tools available. This playbook was created to close readiness gaps by identifying management areas that require improvement and recommending actions to improve pest readiness. Users can prioritize actions based on gaps identified through an initial 20-question self-assessment quiz. So now that we've covered the background, let's dive into the meat and potatoes of the recommendations of this document. So each time you see the tiny recommendations document up in the top right, that means this is language that came directly from the document. Now that we're starting to get a picture of what the big deal is about this little insect, let's discuss what we can do. Preparing for a forest pest infestation is important. Preparing for a forest pest infestation that is right next door, or maybe even already in Washington, is imperative. When emerald ash borer arrives, it will have big impacts, but we get to shape how we respond and hopefully soften the blow a little bit. First, field operations for ash management. Field operations include first to simply stop planting ash. Remember the Fraxinus genus, not mountain ash, which is the Sorbus genus. They are not susceptible hosts, just that Fraxinus species, or genus rather. Even if they are on sale at the nursery, resist the urge to save a buck and select a different species. It may feel like enough to create internal policy that requires no one on your municipality or organization plants ash trees. However, we need to take this one step further and remove ash species from all planting lists. Remember that street tree planting lists that you've been meaning to update for the last 10 years? Well, here's your chance to do it. Take a look and check out all of the street tree planting lists that you have, or any planting lists that are available in your municipality, and remove Fraxinus species from those lists. Limit maintenance of current ash trees to only what is necessary for public safety. While standing in the face of an impending forest pest infestation like emerald ash borer, financial planning is going to be even more critical than ever. For this reason, it is not going to be financially reasonable or efficient work for staff to focus on routine maintenance of ash trees, save for priority trees you intend to treat that are already treating. I know some folks are already treating in the southern part of the state. More on treatment in a bit. Of course, we will still need to continue to watch for safety hazards and mitigate those as necessary for public safety. Next on the list of community actions for preparing for response to emerald ash borer is staff training. Learning to recognize an infestation is going to be one of the most important first steps in staff training. Before we can learn to recognize an infestation, we must first know where they might show up. So gain proficiency in identifying ash trees. Both are native Fraxinus latifolia as well as potential planted ash tree species. And once you gain proficiency in identifying one ash tree species, the others will likely look similar and probably catch your eye. Learn to identify emerald ash borer. Once you know how to spot the host, be sure to familiarize yourself with identifying the insect itself. Remember, it has many lookalikes, so grab some resources to confirm that it is EAB. Become familiar with the signs and symptoms of emerald ash borer infestations. Some of these include top-down decline pattern, water sprouting from the base, the S-shaped galleries under the bark, and D-shaped exit holes. Ensure at least one staff member holds a Washington State pesticide license. There's a whole spectrum of methods for approaching emerald ash borer management, and we suspect that most communities will fall on the side of treating as many priority trees as possible. So part of preparedness for any forest pest infestation is to ensure that one or more staff members holds a Washington State pesticide license that is current before the need arises. It takes time to study and prepare for and schedule this exam, so you'll want to start thinking about that sooner than later. Once you've become proficient in identifying the hosts, the insect, and the signs and symptoms of emerald ash borer, and made sure that at least one person on your team has a Washington State pesticide license that's up to date, what's next? Familiarize yourself with the reporting and initial response procedures. The two agencies to report to are the Washington Invasive Species Council as well as USDA's APHIS. Both are tracking infestations and can provide information on how to proceed if you find an infested tree. Washington Invasive Species Council has a reporting app, which is super handy. I haven't seen an app for reporting for USDA, but it may exist. If you know of one, please let us know. But otherwise, you can just go to their website, track down the EAB page, and you can report there. And then infested wood will also need to be quarantined. Third on our list of actions for communities is to ensure that a tree inventory is in place and updated. I'm going to turn it over to Daria for this section.
Awesome. Thank you, Em, for passing the baton. All right, my first question is, does your community have that tree inventory? anyone that is in charge of managing urban trees, like a city, university, or even an HOA, should seek to obtain a tree inventory, because you can't effectively manage what you don't know you have. And a tree inventory, it will unequivocally show you what you do have. You also can't understand your vulnerability for an invasive species attack if you don't know what species of trees and in what quantities or conditions they exist throughout your community. So when thinking of a tree inventory, there's plenty of options for you. You could consider conducting a tree by tree inventory. This is a comprehensive or complete inventory of all of your public trees, including those growing along right-of-ways, in maintained areas of public parks, maybe even around other municipal buildings like those fire stations or police stations or libraries. Sometimes those areas get overlooked, and we want to make sure that they're also included in inventories. Most often, complete inventories are contracted out because they can be so much data to collect, but some have been completed in-house in Washington by in-house arborist staff. We have numerous examples from Yakima or Ellensburg, for instance, where the city arborists actually did take it upon themselves to collect data on the public trees, which did take them a number of years, but now they have nice complete data sets. Other cheaper options for you, if you don't have a tree inventory yet, is you could just take a sample inventory, which could look like randomly selecting streets in your city and then inventorying the trees just along those streets, or maybe a number of parks, just selecting a couple parks and getting a sample understanding of your species composition. Another option is to inventory just the ash trees in your community, specifically if you want to focus only on preparing for emerald ash borer. I think above all with inventories is you really don't have to get fancy with them anymore. There's many data collection apps available, even on smartphones these days, that can help many size communities gather their own tree data, so long as you or other staff members on your team know how to identify an ash tree. So like Em was saying earlier, make sure you know how to identify that ash tree. If your community doesn't have a tree inventory, make sure you reach out to our program, to myself or Zach Malema, and we can help you get started by seeing if we have any historical tree data for your community in our records that you can work from, or by connecting you to resources such as our minimum standards for tree inventories document that we've created, or walking you through our annual grant program so that you can prepare an application and apply for an inventory project. Let's go to that next slide. All right, a tree inventory is important because it will tell you many things, like how many trees you have. So for EAB, we're looking for all the trees in the genus Fraxinus. Yes, olives and white fringe trees are susceptible as well, but not at the rate that ash is. And we don't really have much olive or fringe trees in our inventories. Ash is much more dominant. The inventory will also show you where the trees are located. It will tell you the size or DBH of your trees, and it will help you identify those ash candidates to preserve utilizing treatments, or also ash candidates that could be utilized for wood utilization projects, or getting set up with a local sawyer or wood makers in your community. Overall, that inventory will help you direct your management activities. And all that data on tree size and species, it will end up helping you with budget estimates. And it's only the budget that will actually help you decide what's feasible to manage in your community. Next slide. So in the context of an invasive pest outbreak, one especially critical way that a tree inventory can be of assistance to you is by helping you identify pockets of, in this instance, dense ash populations, and will help you to visualize the impacts that emerald ash borer might have on your city. So let's break that down with some visuals. Here's a peek into our Washington Urban Tree Data Aggregation Project. We have just over 500,000 street and park trees plotted throughout the state from roughly 40 communities. It's important to note that some of the inventories shown here are complete park and street tree inventories, again, meaning that nearly every public tree is represented in that city, whereas other inventories might just be sample inventories, so roughly 2,000 trees or so. So data representation here between each city is not equally representative, but it is the data that we currently have, so it's a great starting place to assess vulnerability. And of our aggregated tree inventory data that we have throughout the state, of over 500,000 known street and park tree points in our urban areas, about 3.4% of all of those trees are susceptible to emerald ash borer. The data that we have also shows that the median size of urban ash recorded in our aggregated inventory is about 6 inches in diameter. But some of those inventories are 7 to 8 years old, so that number might be a little lower and might now be more inflated. But still, it shows that the vast majority of the known public ash in our urban forests in Washington are small, which currently makes them easier and cheaper to manage. So that 3.42% that we're all seeing on the screen, that may seem like a small number overall, but it equates to almost 15,000 ash trees. And that's only what we know is out there on the public landscape, not even the public ash trees in residential backyards or in school grounds. It's, again, only data that we know of from roughly 40 cities and towns. And this percentage varies city by city. That's really important to note, because in some communities, ash represents 1 of every 10 inventoried public trees, or even 1 of every 4 currently inventoried public trees. I was inspired by Joey's chart from last week's presentation when he showed something equivalent relating to maples and sooty bark disease. So I mirrored it here. And again, based on our known inventory data, these are some of the cities with the highest proportion of ash street trees. Thus, EAB and EAB management is going to look really different in these communities and has the potential to be a pretty serious problem. You'll notice that it's both east and west side communities that are mentioned here, and that just goes to show that ash is planted in every single urban area. It's not just in that native Latfolia range that we saw earlier. So let's further visualize this. Where does ash show up in our communities? In Lacey, for instance, there's a couple major monocultures of ash, and they seem to be along some of the high capacity arterial roads. This is common to see because communities tend to contract a lot of tree plantings out when doing road work. And as a whole, we have had minimal tree diversity standards in place over the past years. So we're just beginning to see tree planting diversity standards being implemented that can help us get ahead of something like a monoculture occurring in the future, hopefully. I know we all often do still see a lot of monoculture plantings in newly developed areas, but we need to get away from that. In Tacoma, we see ash in a number of what I like to call hotspots throughout the city, like in their downtown area, along a couple of major streets, but also in a few neighborhoods and highly residential settings. There's some hotspots of ash. And then in Longview, we see something completely different where ash is basically sprinkled everywhere. So management of emerald ash borer is going to look very different on the ground in each of these cities. Not every resident or neighborhood is going to see the devastation or impact of emerald ash borer the same. For some people, the whole street character, their whole neighborhood character could change. So the whole look and feel of their trees as they're driving down the street is going to look different. While in other neighborhoods, maybe just one of the 50 planted street trees will be taken down and replanted, and maybe that whole neighborhood won't even notice that there was an infestation. It might just look like any old dead tree that's being taken down by crews. So that's something that we all as managers, as volunteers, helping with emerald ash borer efforts, we have to be aware of that. Not everyone experiences a pest outbreak the same. Some residents feel those immediate effects of all these trees dying at the same time much deeper, and they might have a really emotional response to the management decisions that we make. It's really important to get a plan together ahead of time that also considers the thoughts and options and opinions, rather, of residents. All right, so now that we know what trees we have in our inventory and where they are located, we are going to be able to prioritize ash trees most suitable for treatment by considering which trees are most significant to the community or provide the most ecosystem services. And on that topic of preserving ash trees, I think it's really important to note that some urban ash in our communities are going to be extremely large canopy species. You know, these aren't crab apples. For example, green ash has a spread of about 25 feet at maturity. So canopy estimates could also be calculated using your tree inventory data. And cities with canopy cover goals may really want to track separately. For instance, 0.7% inventory telling you that it has 3.7% of ash could actually equate to 6% of your total public tree canopy cover. So it all depends on the size of your current ash population. And that's just something I want everyone to really be aware of before we talk about preservation. All right, so more examples. These might be two areas that an urban forester could consider looking for trees suitable for treatment. I chose these two areas because I thought they were kind of interesting comparisons. On the left, we have a residential neighborhood. About 40% of their street trees are ash. That's a pretty large proportion, meaning that a lot of their canopy cover is probably also ash. This neighborhood would indefinitely see a lot of action with emerald ash borer, whether it's removal and replacement of the ash or treatment. I also thought this highway buffer strip on the right was interesting. The ash here are providing an extensive noise, visual and physical barrier of the highway to this industrial neighborhood. So loss of ash may create a less safe environment or a noisier environment or an environment with more pollution in this area. So now let's imagine if we layered on top of these maps tree canopy cover scores or pollution indexes, or we also looked at the socioeconomic data in both of these neighborhoods to tell us a greater story that could maybe give us an indication into which trees we might consider for treatment or for preservation. So I did do that for us ahead of time. I didn't have enough time to write the actual scores down, but I looked at American Forest tree equity scores for both of these locations, and I looked at the Washington Health Department environmental health disparities map for both of these locations. And it's probably not surprising to learn that the census block near the highway and close to the industrial zone has a lower canopy cover, is experiencing higher temperatures, and is also experiencing more pollution. So these ash, although they're living a harder life, are also arguably providing more ecosystem services to the area that's already experiencing higher environmental health disparities. So when you look at it under this context, deciding which ash to save, if any, becomes a very difficult and time-consuming decision for an urban forester when looked under this lens. And once again, we should look to the inventory data when making management decisions. And this time we'll look to that inventory data, not visually, but by the numbers. In this chart, which is showing the size of ash trees within a community by their DBH, which stands for a diameter at breast height, it has some management implications. Roughly 40% of the ash in the city are in that 1 to 6 inch category, which is small enough to remove with limited equipment. That's really great because it reduces removal costs, and many of the small removals can be done in-house with just some small hand tools. And maybe even could be a good opportunity to involve volunteers in removing some of these smaller trees. The inventory data also shows that we're not sure about 13% of the ash. We're not sure how big they are, which might require a field staff member to go find those trees and measure their diameter so that we can also chart a course of action for them. Next slide, please. Thanks. And in the city, we also have a percentage of ash, nearly 20%, that could be potential treatment candidates. 20% is calculated by looking at trees above 12 inches in diameter, because treatment is only appropriate for those healthy, high-value trees that are larger in diameter, because it is going to be a long-term commitment. It's going to be over the life of a tree. And if a tree is small enough to just remove and replant and the canopy can be gained within a quicker amount of time, that tends to be a better course of action than committing to this very long-term commitment over the life of the tree, treating it. So there's numerous amounts of insecticides on the market for EAB treatment. That's one thing that we have going for us here in the Western states, knowing that the Midwest and Eastern states have already dealt with emerald ash borer. There's all these products out on the market, like triage, imidacloprid, and many other options. And most applications are now done via the systematic trunk injection by a certified pesticide applicator. But timing of treatments is also an important factor. And before deciding on any insecticide or application method, you should contact the Washington State Department of Agriculture for a consultation. And very briefly, I just want to make you aware that tree scoring matrix for ash treatments have also been developed. And could you go to the next slide? Thank you. Which become very useful when there are a lot of ash trees to weigh and when treatment funding is limited. So this matrix can help you assess each tree that you might consider for treatment by looking at factors like the tree's health, its defects, its form, its size, its locations, its current energy savings, proximity to surface water, if it is already impacting utilities, if there's efficient irrigation for that tree, and proximity to known EAB infestations. You might also want to identify any trees that have particularly historic, cultural, or heritage value in your community. And now that we know what we have and we know where it is and we know how large the trees are, we can make some financial planning. We can take some financial planning steps. So we first recommend learning about the costs and benefits associated with treatment versus removal and replacement of trees before making a firm plan. And your city might also want to weigh some wood recycling methods that could be effective for reducing the spread of EAB throughout your community. And no matter what you do, you want to document the process to help prepare any future bids, RFPs, or contracts that you might need to inevitably put together in the event of an outbreak. And for budget or scenario estimates, if your community does already have a tree inventory, it's rather easy to use the Purdue EAB cost calculator as a first step in your financial planning process. And I'll leave you with some rough estimates of removal, stump grinding, treatment, and tree replacement costs from my time spent managing emerald ash borer in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So these numbers are from 2018, and we know inflation has hit since, so I'm sure they're rather low now, but it's a good starting place. And I do want to reiterate that message that residents do change management priorities and outcomes when it comes to managing an invasive pest outbreak. So holding public sessions to review any management plans that you come up with is key to a cohesive response with your community members. Back to you, Anne.
Thanks, Daria. So next on the list of actions to take in communities is tree ordinances. Does your community have tree ordinances in place already? If so, these ordinances should be reviewed to include the following. If not, when creating tree ordinances, it would be helpful to include these components. Review current tree ordinances with consideration for the proactive removal of susceptible host tree species and the removal of dead or dying trees in respect to ease and accessibility for property owners that maintain trees on private property and or maintain trees on public rights-of-way. It is common for municipalities to defer maintenance and financial responsibility to the adjacent property owner to the right-of-way trees. But review policies and ordinances to ensure that if the adjacent property owners will not be restricted in pursuing treatment of ash trees by qualified providers, nor will they be restricted in the removal and replacement of ash trees. Then authority of local jurisdictions for trees on publicly managed lands and trees that threaten public property. So ensure that policies, ordinances, and tree codes do not restrict your municipality's authority to manage public trees as needed in the face of an EAB outbreak. And finally, guidance for replacement of all removed trees with non-host tree species. Educate staff and the public about what trees are going to be appropriate for each unique location as removal and replacement needs arise. The idea here is to ensure that your community has not policied itself out of being able to manage trees effectively for EAB. There are specific nuisance tree ordinances that some communities have that help with management of emerald ash borer and other related tree issues that are similar. Do you have resources and information that can help adjacent property owners figure out what to do with their right-of-way trees, or are they feeling like they're left in the dark? Next, awareness is one of the main ingredients in management of a forest pest that is new to our environment. This insect originally came from Asia and most recently has traveled over from areas outside of the Pacific Northwest into Oregon. So it's understandable that knowledge about emerald ash borer is not widespread in our area. I'm excited that you're here and learning more about EAB, and now it's time to spread the word to communities around yours as well. So fifth step on the list of actions municipalities can take is to raise awareness in surrounding areas by coordinating with neighboring jurisdictions. Your preparedness only goes as far as your neighbor's preparedness when it comes to a forest pest infestation. Then moving down the list is to become familiar with the Pest Readiness Playbook. You might hear my dog bark, and my apologies if that happens. So Pest Readiness Playbook. This is an excellent resource that is complementary to our short recommendations document we are covering today. The Pest Readiness Playbook is a comprehensive, in-depth guide to becoming more prepared for forest pest outbreaks such as EAB. The Pest Readiness Playbook can help provide an understanding of the baseline at which your community stands currently and help identify what actions are needed to become more prepared. One of the first recommended actions is to work through the self-assessments. Then identify community-specific readiness actions once your team has gone through the self-assessments. And finally, each community has the option to create pest-specific response plans. The cities of Vancouver and Seattle have done an excellent job of each of these actions, including creating a response plan to emerald ash borer. I have not yet seen a response plan from any other municipality, but if you have one or you're working on one, please do let us know. We'd love to check it out. The Pest Readiness Playbook can also be found on our DNR Urban and Community Forestry website under the Urban Tree Learning Center tab, just below recommendations document we're reviewing right now. The Pest Readiness Self-Assessment asks 20 questions that help answer the question, is your community forest pest ready? The 4 sections that are quizzed here are Section 1, Understanding Risk. First and foremost, if we're not aware of what natural resources or trees we're trying to protect or how to identify them, then we won't be able to know the vulnerabilities that those resources have. Section 2, Capacity to support a response. This section addresses how ready we are to expand our detection efforts, reporting efforts, and ability to act within the capacity of the people, programs, and partnerships in our community. Section 3 is the ability to expedite informed decision-making, and that gets at the fact that misinformed or slow-paced decision-making diminishes our ability to effectively respond to pest outbreaks and protect our community's trees. This section gauges how ready communities are to make decisions related to pest management. And Section 4, community support to expand your impact. Without community support, you could risk poor communication and lack of information spread across the system. With urban pest outbreaks, it's key that there is a unified management approach and message. Based on the results of the self-assessment, your community will be able to identify actions that could help improve pest readiness in the short and long term. Arguably, understanding risk is the most important aspect of pest management to consider because it shifts our frame of mind from reactive management to proactive management. So often we don't realize the value of a resource until it's gone or being attacked. If we're not aware of what we have and the benefits that it provides us, we aren't going to be invested in its protection, and we won't be aware of its vulnerabilities. And finally, on our list of what communities can do is maintain healthy urban tree canopy. The loss of ash will impact your overall canopy. Tree diversity is key to healthy urban forests. So avoid planting monocultures. Monocultures are plantings of trees that are comprised of all the same species. When forest pests or pathogens become established in a monoculture, they have the devastating impacts and the potential to destroy the entire population of trees within the monoculture. Species diversity can combat this scenario. When we plant trees and plants of a variety of different genera, then there is less of an opportunity for one pest or pathogen to take out an entire block of trees. Improve non-ash tree species diversity. Even if ash trees make up a small percentage of your community's urban forests or natural areas, losing this species would have a significant impact. We can't treat every single ash tree, especially when it comes to natural areas. So it will become increasingly important to do what we can in this changing climate to provide the health of the tree canopy that will remain, to improve the health of the tree canopy that will remain after emerald ash borer. Some things you can do are mulch around your urban trees. This doesn't have to be a big investment. If you or your contractor is already doing some tree work that involves a chipper, use the chips in the same area or nearby unless they're infested with a pest or pathogen. Leaves, needles, and other debris can be raked into piles around trees rather than blowing it off and carrying it away. So use what you've got. The link here takes you to the Trees Are Good document on proper mulching techniques that you see in the bottom right-hand corner. Reduce stressors such as soil compaction and construction impacts, and limit changes in hydrology. Consider irrigation if necessary. We're getting longer, hotter summers, so that might become a necessity in some locations. And the key to irrigation or any type of watering situation is infrequent, deep watering. That will encourage a drought-tolerant root system. So now that we've covered what actions communities can take regarding response to emerald ash borer, here's what we can do as individuals. Or if your community has campgrounds, parks, or other areas with fire pits, you might start with the Washington Invasive Species Council to find out where you can get buy it where you burn it materials. So the key here is don't move firewood. Buy firewood where you burn it and burn it where you buy it. When we move firewood across state, city, county, or even neighborhood lines, then we're taking a huge risk of moving forest pets that might be living inside that firewood just out of sight. When you travel even out of your backyard and want to spark a fire, support your local firewood stand and buy it where you burn it. There were hundreds of additional resources that I wanted to include in the more information section of this document, but we kept it to these 4 sources that will be helpful when diving deeper into the topic of emerald ash borer. That said, there is almost an endless amount of information out there if you want to take it further. Turn it over to you, Daria.
All right. So what all the components of this recommendations document that has created are leading up to is really the question of where will your community fall on that EAB management spectrum? In review, there's a couple of main management options. Removal, so sometimes full removal of all the ash trees. Sometimes it's on a rotation or schedule. So too many trees aren't taken out at once. As you see on the left picture here, this is a scenario in which every other ash tree was taken out on a street that was completely lined with ash and replaced. And then 5 years later, the remaining trees were taken out and replanted. Treatment is also an option, like we've mentioned, but it's limited by size constraints, condition, and costs. And it's a very long-term commitment for the life of the tree. There's been communities in Michigan that first did have a treatment plan and 8 years later completely stopped that treatment plan because it became too expensive. So it really has to be taken into consideration that it's a long-term commitment for the whole life of that tree. And then last, some communities' management strategy is no management. So this last tree was actually one that we missed in our tree inventory and never came up. We didn't know we had it in Grand Rapids. So when I drove by it years after EAB swarmed through the city, I had to get out, inspect the tree, and add it to our removal contract list. But in some cities, that is the management, no management. So the summation of what we are learning from Eastern states is that it is much more effective and cost effective to proactively manage these ash trees rather than react when the trees are already dying. Next slide. So yeah, cities, they usually fall into one of these three areas: preemptive management, selective management, or delayed management. And if your community follows the guidelines set forth in this recommendations document, then you're going to be ready to be preemptively managing emerald ash borer before it hits. And if your community happens to only follow a couple of the components, then you might fall more in the middle road and be more of a selective, be more on that selective management track. And if you don't follow any components of this document, then you'll likely fall under that delayed management or reactive side.
So a few upcoming events that are related to this topic are happening on May 24th. The Washington Invasive Species Council will have Maria Marlin out on this webinar series that you're on right now with the Pest Readiness program that we work with them on. And then Stephanie Helms from City of Seattle will be presenting on implementing the Pest Readiness program in Seattle. There's also an awesome webinar next week, so make sure you tune into that too. And then on June 6th, we will be hosting alongside Washington Invasive Species Council and partnered with the City of Vancouver Urban Forestry on June 6th from 12 to 4 for an in-person workshop. Yay! We're always excited about that happening these days. So those are coming up. And then, yeah, thank you to Washington State University for putting on this fantastic webinar series. Come back the next couple of weeks to see more. And thank you to each of you for taking the time to learn more about response to emerald ash borer and how to improve preparedness in your communities. So here's our contact information, and we are